You may remember that when we spoke about research orientation and its role in determining your research design, we said that it wasn't the only influence on your research design, and that often practical constraints are just as important. For example, your access to the data you wish to employ in your research, you wish to manipulate in your research, but also, crucially so for our purposes in this video, ethical considerations. These can be related to potential harm to participants, lack of informed consent, invasions of privacy of the participants, and general issues of deception. I'm going to cover them in this video together with administrative details of how to ensure that you have ethics clearance for your research. Discussions about ethical principles in research, and perhaps more importantly, transgressions from those principles, tend to revolve around certain issues that recur in different guises, but that have been usefully broken down by Diener and Crandall in 1978 into four main areas: whether there is any harm to participants, whether there is lack of informed consent, whether there is an invasion of privacy, or any deception caused by the research. Although these four areas can be seen to overlap to some extent, they do form a useful classification of ethical principles in and for research, and therefore need to be specifically examined, and we will do this in turn. Let's start with deception. This is basically about you ensuring that the research is not represented as something other than what it is. For that, do consider ethical consideration versus the naturalness of data. What is meant by that is that often researchers want to limit participants' understanding of what the research is about so that the participants respond more naturally to the experimental treatment. Indeed, some ethical codes appear to condone the strictly bounded use of deception in order to preserve the naturalness of data. That is perhaps the case in some fields of study. It is not really the case in business studies. Deception is not condoned in any way in business studies. It may be, for example, in psychology, but it's not for business, so do not consider that as a possibility. Then do consider the dichotomy between methodological advantages and the cost in human dignity. Deception is simply not a nice thing to do. It's not desirable because it is an offense to human dignity. In other words, it is undignified to consider your participants as lesser beings and the extent of knowledge they possess in relation to the research project to which they participate. If they are participants in your research, they ought to be seen on equal footing with the researchers. So do not patronize them by deceiving them about the purpose of your study. Finally, consider the issue of professionalism. Deception is not a professional thing to do because the image of professional research work is adversely affected by deception. If researchers were to do that, they might experience difficulty in gaining financial support, as well as the cooperation of future prospective research participants. From the university perspective, you'd be in breach of contract if you are to fill in the relevant forms to obtain ethics approval for your study, but then you go on and deceive your participants. So just don't do it. The second ethical issue raised by Diener and Crandall is that to do with informed consent. This is about making sure that participants are given the information necessary to make an informed decision about whether or not they wish to participate in the study. So if we go back to the argument about the dignity of your participants, it is important that the way you portray your research for them is done in a manner that is easy to grasp, easy to understand, and not in specialist language. As our Code of Ethical Conduct suggests, it is the duty of Academy members to preserve and protect the privacy, dignity, well-being, and freedom of research participants. Those cannot be preserved unless information reaches your participant in as accurate a way as possible. How can you ensure that this happens? Administratively speaking, through your plain language statement and your consent form, which you can find on the university website and which you are required to fill in to obtain ethical approval from our Ethics Approval Committee. The kind of information that these forms are requiring you to include for your participants includes warning of possible harm, providing explicit opportunities to refuse to participate or to terminate participation at any time, perhaps the possibility that your interviews might be recorded, as well as what data collection and analysis techniques are going to be used, whether or not their identity will be revealed and to whom. The third principle which Diener and Crandall introduced is that to do with harm to participants. This is about assessing and trying to minimize any risks associated with the exposure of participants to harm. There are various types of harm, as you can imagine. There is physical harm as well as, and perhaps more widespread, psychological and emotional harm. The risk assessment document included alongside the other ethics approval forms on the university website will be able to guide you through the types of harm and ways to mitigate those risks. There is also the issue of confidentiality of records and anonymity of accounts that can also be put down to this principle of harm to participants. And the way to mitigate against those risks is, apart from reading the risk guidance document, is to fill in the ethics approval form with great care and consideration to these principles. The final ethics principle introduced by Diener and Crandall is invasion of privacy, or lack of, making sure that the participant's right to privacy is respected. It links with the anonymity and confidentiality issue raised earlier, and it also links with informed consent. How you would be able to mitigate against this, it's through, again, considerate completion of your ethics approval form. The ethics approval form may offer you the possibility to reveal personal information with the respondent's consent. However, I would urge you not to do it unless there is a very good reason why you might choose to do so. Often students may think that if the respondents are better known or recognized experts in their fields, those views will hold more weight. So this sometimes seems to be a good enough explanation for some students to tick that option on the ethics approval form, according to which the personal details of the respondents are to be revealed with their consent, that is. Even if participants may consent to it, you need to really reflect on how necessary that actually is. I can imagine in some fields of study it may be necessary or indeed unavoidable. There are some situations in which even if you conceal the identity of the respondent, it is still obvious by the nature of the information revealed as to who that respondent is. Again, in most overwhelming majority, so much so that I cannot even conceive of a situation that is otherwise, business studies do not require revealing such personal information. So try to stay away from that and respect your participants' right to privacy, even where they don't perceive it to be as important as we and the ethics committee may do. A final issue, and not included in Diener and Crandall's account of ethics in research, however, very important, particularly at university level, is making sure that the research undertaken is well thought out in order to offer the participants the opportunity to take part in meaningful research and not research which cannot be used to advance knowledge. It is in keeping with the principle of dignified research, research in which you treat your participants as equal members with you, the researchers, in that research project, making them be part of something meaningful and not of something we can't use to advance knowledge. How you could do that through, again, considerate treatment of the ethics approval form, but also through the data collection instrument. So your ethics approval committee would like to see your data collection instrument to be satisfied that that instrument is a solid tool through which meaningful data can be collected. So in a nutshell, through discussions with your supervisor, you need to complete 3 forms and create an additional document with your data collection instrument, either questionnaire or interview themes, focus group themes, so on and so forth. Or if you do ethnographic research, an observation pro forma that indicates the kind of themes that you're going to observe in the context in which you were given access. The documents requiring submission to the Ethics Committee of the University and indeed the College of Social Science are Ethics Approval Form, Plain Language Form, and the Consent Form, as well as a data collection instrument. There is no form for this 4th one. You will need to devise that in a separate document, or if it is an online survey, you will need to create the online survey and send us the link. Useful websites through which you would be able to read guidance notes to help you fill in those documents, but also where you would find sample documents are the following websites on this slide. Do take considerate action to ensure that your research is ethical and considerate to society and other human beings.